Thomas Reynolds stood at the expansive windows of his opulent study, a room adorned with rich mahogany furniture and gilded frames that housed portraits of his ancestors. The view outside was nothing short of breathtaking, yet he felt a twinge of disappointment as he surveyed his sprawling estate. The manicured lawns and grand architecture were impressive, but the garden, his garden, was a different story. It lacked vibrancy. The flowers seemed sparse, the hedges unkempt. It was a mere shadow of the lush, colorful paradise he had envisioned when he first purchased the property. "Is this what I pay for?" he muttered under his breath, adjusting his cufflinks with a disdainful flick of his wrist. "A lackluster garden that reflects nothing of my status." The words dripped with arrogance, echoing in the silence of the room. He felt the pressure of his social status weighing heavily on his shoulders, a constant reminder that appearances mattered in the world he inhabited. His thoughts wandered to the upcoming charity gala he had planned, where the elite of the city would gather to sip champagne and admire the fruits of his success. He could already envision the whispers behind his back if his garden remained in its current state. What would they say about him? That he was a man of wealth with no taste? That he was simply another arrogant businessman, flaunting his riches without a hint of sophistication? "Enough is enough," he declared, his voice firm and resolute. "I need a gardener, someone who knows how to bring beauty to this place." He reached for his phone, his fingers dancing across the screen as he searched for local landscapers. Meanwhile, a world away, Samuel Parker was wrestling with his own demons. The sun was setting on the small, modest home he shared with his ailing mother and his young daughter Lily. The air was thick with the smell of the evening meal simmering on the stove, but Samuel's mind was elsewhere. He wiped his brow, a bead of sweat trickling down his forehead as he knelt in the small patch of dirt that served as his garden. It was a humble affair, with wilting vegetables and a few stubborn flowers that had somehow managed to survive despite his financial hardships. "Just a little longer, Mum," he called out, his voice carrying a mixture of hope and exhaustion. His mother's frail voice came back to him, barely above a whisper. "Samuel, you work too hard. You need to rest," she replied, her concern evident in her tone. "I can't rest now, not with the bills piling up. And Lily needs new shoes for school," he replied, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him like a heavy cloak. He had dreams of a better life, of brighter days when laughter filled their home, but every step forward seemed to be met with another setback. Samuel wiped his hands on his worn jeans, glancing at his daughter, who was playing quietly in the corner of the yard. She had a bright smile, a beacon of light in their otherwise challenging life. "One day, Lily," he murmured, almost to himself. "One day, things will be different." But dreaming was a luxury he could hardly afford. With his mother's health declining and his meager wages barely covering the essentials, he felt trapped in a cycle of hardship. He had spent years cultivating a love for nature, nurturing the small garden they had, and finding solace in the beauty of the earth. It was his escape, a place where he could forget the struggles of life, even if only for a moment. Back in his grand estate, Thomas Reynolds had made a decision. He would hire the best gardener he could find, someone who could transform his lackluster garden into a spectacle of color and beauty. The look of envy from his peers would be worth the expense. He finally settled on a local landscaping company and scheduled a meeting for the following day, his mind already racing with images of vibrant flowers and perfectly trimmed hedges. The next morning, the sun rose bright and clear, illuminating the estate in a warm glow. Thomas stood at the entrance of his garden, his arms crossed, surveying the empty space with a critical eye. He barely noticed the small figure approaching, the humble gardener he had hired to come for an interview. Samuel Parker arrived, his hands calloused from years of hard work, his clothes simple but tidy. He stood before the imposing gates of the estate, feeling dwarfed by the grandeur that surrounded him. As he stepped through the gates, he couldn't help but feel a mixture of awe and trepidation. This was a world he had only glimpsed through the windows of other people's homes, a world of wealth that felt foreign and distant. "Mr. Reynolds?" Samuel called out, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. Thomas turned, his gaze sweeping over the gardener with a hint of skepticism. "You're Samuel Parker?" he asked, his tone laced with an air of superiority. He noted the man's humble attire and the faint scent of earth that clung to him. I expected someone more refined. Samuel smiled, trying to mask his discomfort. I may not look the part, sir, but I assure you I have a passion for gardening that goes beyond appearances. Passion doesn't cut it in this world, Thomas replied sharply, his impatience evident. I need results. I have a gala coming up, and I want my garden to be the talk of the town. I understand, sir, Samuel said, his heart racing. I can create something beautiful for you. I've worked in gardens of all sizes and can bring life and color to any space. Just give me a chance. Thomas raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. What can you do that others can't? I see the potential in every plant, Samuel replied, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. Every flower has its place, and with the right care, I can turn this garden into a vibrant sanctuary. Trust me, I can make it bloom. For a moment, Thomas hesitated, caught off guard by the sincerity in Samuel's voice. He had expected a polished pitch, but instead, he found authenticity in the gardener's words. Very well, he said reluctantly, crossing his arms. But know this, if you fail to impress, you won't be here for long. I won't let you down, Samuel promised, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. As they shook hands, Thomas felt a strange sense of connection to this humble man. Perhaps it was the way Samuel spoke about nature, or the earnestness in his eyes. Whatever it was, it stirred something within him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. With that, their paths intertwined, setting the stage for a journey neither of them could have anticipated. In that moment, Thomas Reynolds' world began to shift, and Samuel Parker found the opportunity he desperately needed. Little did they know, the true impact of their meeting would transcend the boundaries of wealth and status, leading them both to a profound understanding of what it meant to thrive in a world where human connection was the ultimate treasure. As the sun began to rise over the Reynolds estate, the golden rays spilled across the meticulously trimmed lawns, illuminating the vibrant colors of the flowers Samuel Parker had planted. Each bloom seemed to radiate with life, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile environment Thomas Reynolds had grown accustomed to. Samuel, kneeling in the rich, dark soil, wiped the sweat from his brow and stood back to admire his work. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. Thomas, meanwhile, was just beginning his day. He shuffled into the grand dining room, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. As he sipped his drink, he glanced out the large window overlooking the garden. The hues of pink, yellow, and lavender seemed to dance in the morning light, and for the first time, he found himself captivated. His eyes widened slightly, and he set his mug down, momentarily forgetting the pressures of his corporate empire. "Is that the garden?" he murmured, almost to himself. "Yes, Mr. Reynolds," came the soft reply from his housekeeper Martha, who was busy arranging the breakfast table. "Mr. Parker has been working diligently. It seems he has quite the talent for gardening." Thomas frowned, his brow furrowing in thought. Talent, indeed, but can it really elevate the estate's status? The skepticism lingered in his voice, though a flicker of curiosity sparked within him. Meanwhile, Samuel continued to cultivate the soil, his hands working rhythmically as he planted new seeds. He hummed a gentle tune, a remnant of simpler times when he would sing with his daughter in their small backyard. The memory brought a smile to his face, but it was quickly replaced by the weight of his responsibilities. His mother's health was deteriorating, and the bills were piling up. Still, he found solace in his work, the garden becoming a sanctuary where he could momentarily escape the burdens of life. Later that day, as Samuel meticulously arranged flower beds, Thomas approached him. The businessman had donned a crisp suit, his confident demeanor overshadowed by a hint of uncertainty. "Samuel," he called out, his voice carrying a tone of authority. Samuel straightened up, brushing dirt from his hands. "Yes, Mr. Reynolds. I've been meaning to ask you about your vision for the estate. You've done impressive work. What else do you think it needs?" Thomas crossed his arms, the inquiry more of a test than genuine curiosity. Samuel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I believe that every garden tells a story, sir. It should reflect the beauty of life, its struggles and triumphs. If we incorporate more native plants, perhaps a small pond, it could attract wildlife and offer a peaceful escape." A pond? Thomas raised an eyebrow, skepticism creeping in again. And what would that do for my reputation? It wouldn't do anything for your reputation, sir, Samuel replied, meeting Thomas's gaze, but it could bring a sense of tranquility and connection to nature, something that seems to be missing in this busy world. Thomas felt a flicker of irritation. Here was this humble gardener, speaking of tranquility as if it were a currency to be traded. I'm not interested in a retreat. I need this estate to impress my colleagues, he snapped, the edge in his tone evident. Samuel lowered his eyes, a pang of disappointment striking him. I understand, sir, but sometimes the most valuable things aren't measured by status. They are felt, like the joy of seeing a butterfly land on a flower. A moment of silence hung between them, and Thomas found himself contemplating Samuel's words. Though he brushed it off, a small part of him wondered if there was truth in those simple statements, buried beneath layers of wealth and ambition. As the days turned into weeks, Samuel continued to transform the estate. He worked tirelessly, often losing track of time as he immersed himself in the beauty of the garden. The flowers bloomed brighter than ever, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of jasmine and roses. Thomas, on the other hand, started noticing the changes that surrounded him. He would step outside for a breath of fresh air, only to be met by the vibrant colors that seemed to beckon him closer. Samuel, he called one afternoon, finding the gardener pruning a rose bush. I have to say, the garden looks different. It's almost alive. Samuel looked up, his face breaking into a warm smile. Thank you, sir. The garden thrives when it's cared for, much like us. It responds to love and attention. Love? Thomas scoffed lightly, shaking his head. I hardly have time for such sentiments. My life is about results, not feelings. I believe the two can coexist, Samuel replied gently, his voice steady. You don't have to choose one over the other. You can achieve results with a heart that cares. Look at the garden. It's flourishing because of the care it receives. Once again, Thomas felt a wave of irritation wash over him. How dare this gardener speak to him about life, as though he understood the complexities of wealth and power. Yet, beneath his irritation, a strange curiosity began to brew, a desire to understand what lay beneath Samuel's humble exterior. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the estate, Thomas found himself in the garden once more. The petals glimmered in the fading light, and he felt a pull to explore the space. He wandered among the flowers, letting his fingers graze the soft petals. Beautiful, isn't it? Samuel's voice broke through the tranquility, and Thomas turned to see Samuel emerging from behind a cluster of blooming hydrangeas. Yes, it is, Thomas admitted, his voice softer than he intended. I've never really taken the time to appreciate it before. Sometimes we get so caught up in our own worlds that we forget to look around, Samuel said, a hint of understanding in his eyes. Life has a way of reminding us of what truly matters. Like what? Thomas challenged, his arrogance creeping back. Like family, friendship, and the simple joys of nature, Samuel paused, gathering his thoughts. These are the things that fill us with purpose, not the accolades or the money we accumulate. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, feeling exposed by the gardener's insights. I suppose you have your own struggles. It must be difficult, working so hard and not seeing the fruits of your labor materialize in wealth. Samuel nodded, but his expression remained calm. Wealth isn't just about money, Mr. Reynolds. It's about the love we share with those around us. I work hard for my family, not for the riches that come with it. My daughter and mother are my true treasures. Your daughter, Thomas murmured, the thought of family igniting a flicker of something deep within him. What dreams do you have for her? Samuel's eyes brightened. I want her to have the opportunities I never had. I want her to explore art, to feel the earth beneath her feet, to love nature as I do. His voice was passionate, and for a moment, Thomas found himself captivated. Yet, as quickly as that connection formed, Thomas brushed it away. He didn't have time for such idealism. He had a business to run, a reputation to uphold. Well, you should focus on the present. The future will take care of itself, he declared, though doubt lingered in his mind. As he walked back toward the mansion, He couldn't shake the feeling of Samuel's words echoing in his ears. The resilience of the gardener, the love he had for his family, it all felt foreign yet familiar. Thomas shook his head, trying to dispel the thoughts. He was a businessman after all, not a philosopher. Yet that evening, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he felt an ache for something he couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was the longing for genuine connection in a world that felt increasingly superficial. As he drifted into sleep, the vibrant garden danced in his mind, a vivid tapestry of colors and emotions that began to unravel the tightly wound threads of his life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of Thomas Reynolds's estate, Samuel Parker felt the weight of worry pressing heavily on his chest. He knelt beside a bed of vibrant tulips, their colors seemingly mocking his bleak thoughts. The cheerful petals swayed in the evening breeze, but Samuel's heart was anything but light. His mother's medical bills were piling up, and the meager salary he earned working for Thomas was barely enough to keep his family afloat. Samuel took a deep breath, the earthy scent of the soil grounding him momentarily. He had always found solace in nature, but today it felt like a cruel reminder of how little control he had over his life. He glanced at his phone, a grim reminder of the looming deadlines for the payments. The constant ringing of his mother's phone in the hospital echoed in his mind, a sound he dreaded more than any confrontation. "Maybe I should take a second job," he murmured to himself, running a hand through his unkempt hair. The thought of juggling another job while tending to the garden felt daunting, but what choice did he have? I can't let her down. Not now. As he worked, his thoughts drifted to his daughter, Lily. The sparkle in her eyes when she played in the garden brought him a semblance of joy. He envisioned her picking flowers, her laughter dancing through the air like music. "I'll do whatever it takes," he promised silently, determination hardening his resolve. Meanwhile, inside the grand estate, Thomas Reynolds busied himself with preparations for an extravagant party that evening. The clinking of glasses and the rustle of expensive fabrics filled the air as his staff scurried around, setting up for the event. Thomas stood in the center of the lavish ballroom, surveying the scene with a critical eye. "Make sure the champagne is chilled properly," he barked at one of his assistants, his voice sharp as glass. "And the catering must be flawless. I want everything perfect for my guests." His mind was preoccupied with the superficial aspects of the evening, the right people, the right conversations, the right image. He glanced at the ornate decorations, the elegant floral arrangements that stood in stark contrast to the life Samuel was leading outside. Little did he know he was about to confront the emptiness that lay beneath his wealth. As the first guests began to arrive, Thomas put on his polished mask of charm, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. "Ah, Gerald, so good to see you," he exclaimed, pulling a portly man into a firm embrace. "You must try the truffles, they're simply divine." While the party buzzed with laughter and conversation, Thomas felt a vague sense of detachment. He observed his guests, their faces painted with feigned delight, and a question nagged at him. Was this what life was meant to be? Hours passed, and the guests mingled, their conversations blending into a cacophony of shallow exchanges. Thomas excused himself, stepping outside for a breath of fresh air. The cool night enveloped him, and he wandered toward the garden, seeking solace from the superficiality of the evening. As he approached, a familiar sight greeted him: Samuel, diligently working late into the night. The moonlight cast a silver glow on the garden, illuminating Samuel's focused expression as he trimmed the hedges with precision. The contrast between the vibrant life of the garden and the hollow laughter from the party was stark. "Samuel," Thomas called softly, not wanting to interrupt his concentration. Samuel looked up, his eyes widening with surprise. "Mr. Reynolds, I didn't expect to see you here." He straightened, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "What are you doing out here so late?" Thomas asked, stepping closer to the garden's edge. "Shouldn't you be at home?" Samuel's smile faltered slightly as he glanced back at the work before him. "I just wanted to finish these before the party. It's important to me that the garden looks its best." Thomas furrowed his brow, noticing the fatigue etched on Samuel's face. "You've been working hard," he acknowledged, feeling an unfamiliar pang of guilt. "Is everything all right?" Samuel hesitated, the weight of his struggles pressing down on him. "Just family matters, sir," he said, his voice strained. "Nothing I can't handle." "Family matters," Thomas echoed, a flicker of curiosity igniting within him. "What do you mean?" Samuel avoided his gaze, focusing on a cluster of daisies that needed pruning. "My mother's health has been challenging. Bills are piling up and—" He sighed, running a hand through his hair again. "I'm just doing what I can." Thomas felt a shift in the air, an unspoken connection forming between them. He had always seen Samuel as a gardener, a mere worker on his estate, but now he sensed the depth of the man's struggles. "You're not alone in this," he said, surprising himself with the sincerity of his words. "How can I help?" Samuel looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Reynolds, but I'll manage, I have to." "Samuel, you don't have to shoulder it all by yourself," Thomas insisted, his voice firm yet gentle. "Let me know how I can assist you." The gardener's lips pressed into a thin line, a mixture of pride and gratitude battling within him. "It's just, I don't want to feel like I'm taking advantage of your generosity. You've already given me this job. I'm grateful for it." "Consider it a partnership," Thomas offered, his mind racing with thoughts of how he could help without compromising Samuel's dignity. "We can find a way to ease your burden." Samuel shook his head, a soft smile breaking through the tension. "Thank you, sir. It means a lot, but I'll find a way, I promise." Thomas studied him for a moment, realizing that Samuel's resilience was rooted in something deeper than mere survival. It was a passion for life, for family, for love. The lavish party inside felt increasingly hollow in comparison to the authenticity blooming before him in the garden. "I'll let you get back to work," Thomas said finally, stepping back into the shadows of the estate. "But remember, my door is always open." Samuel nodded, watching him go, a mix of emotions swirling within him. He returned to his task, the moonlight illuminating his path. Yet, as he snipped the branches, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment marked a turning point. Outside, Thomas stood for a moment staring into the garden, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses fading into the background. He realized that while he had surrounded himself with the trappings of wealth, he had lost touch with what truly mattered. The warmth of Samuel's spirit contrasted sharply with the coldness of his social circle, igniting a flicker of change within him that he couldn't yet comprehend. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, Samuel worked tirelessly, unaware of the profound impact his mere presence had begun to have on his employer. In the depths of their contrasting lives, a seed of understanding, of empathy, was being planted, one that would soon grow into something transformative for both men. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the meticulously manicured gardens of Thomas Reynolds's estate, Samuel Parker knelt beside a patch of vibrant marigolds. The scent of earth and blooming flowers enveloped him, a welcome respite from the weight of his worries. He had become accustomed to this rhythm of life, finding solace in the soil, but today felt different. With every flower he tended, the gnawing anxiety about his daughter's health loomed larger in his mind. "Those marigolds are looking splendid, Samuel," Thomas remarked, stepping onto the garden path. His voice, usually laced with authority and impatience, carried an unfamiliar curiosity today. Samuel looked up, momentarily distracted from his thoughts. Thomas stood tall, his sharp suit contrasting sharply against the natural beauty surrounding him. "Thank you, sir. They really brighten up the space, don't they?" Samuel replied, forcing a smile. He quickly ducked his head, not wanting to reveal the turmoil stirring within him. The last thing he wanted was to burden Thomas with his problems. "You've certainly brought life back to this garden," Thomas continued, observing the way Samuel's hands moved deftly among the flowers. "I've never noticed how much a garden can reflect its caretaker. It's almost as if your spirit is woven into these plants." Samuel paused, surprised by the compliment. "I believe every garden has a story, sir, just like every person." Thomas raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And what story does this garden tell?" "It tells of perseverance, of nurturing life despite the challenges that come. It speaks of beauty rising from hardship." Samuel's words resonated deeply with him, He could feel the tension of his own life choices reflected in Samuel's humble perspective. Interesting, Thomas mused, his mind racing. He had spent so much of his life chasing wealth and status, believing that success was measured in assets and influence. Yet here was Samuel, a gardener, finding fulfillment in the very act of growth and care. "Do you think," Thomas began slowly, "that happiness is tied to success?" Samuel looked up, meeting Thomas's gaze. "I think happiness is found in purpose, sir. Success can be fleeting, but when you're working towards something that matters to you, something that nurtures your soul, that's where true joy lies." A silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken thoughts. Thomas felt a stir of emotions he had long buried beneath layers of ambition and pride. "I've spent so much of my life measuring success in dollars and deals," he admitted. "Yet, I often feel empty." Samuel nodded, sensing the vulnerability in Thomas's voice. "Empty can be a good place to start, sir. It means you have room for something new to grow." Just as the conversation began to deepen, Samuel's phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him back to the harsh reality of his life. He fished it out, and his heart sank as he read the name on the screen. It was the hospital. "Excuse me," he said, anxiety creeping into his voice. He stepped away, his hands trembling slightly as he answered the call. "Hello? Mr. Parker, this is Dr. Ellis. I'm calling about your daughter, Lily." Samuel's breath caught in his throat. "Is everything okay?" "Unfortunately, we've received some concerning test results. I need you to come in as soon as possible to discuss the next steps." Panic surged through Samuel. "How serious is it?" "Mr. Parker, I think it would be best to talk in person. Please come to the hospital." The call ended, but the weight of the news pressed heavily on his chest. He stood frozen for a moment, anxiety swirling in his mind like a storm. "Samuel?" Thomas's voice cut through his haze, bringing him back to reality. "Is everything all right?" Samuel forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "It's just a call from the school." Thomas studied him, his brow furrowing. "You don't look all right. You can talk to me if you need to." "I appreciate it, sir, but it's just a small issue. Nothing to worry about." Samuel's voice trembled slightly, betraying him. Thomas took a step closer, instinctively sensing the weight of Samuel's burden. "You can't carry everything alone. You're working hard, and it's clear that you care deeply for your family." Samuel sighed, feeling the walls he had built around his struggles begin to crack. "I just need to focus on my work, sir. I don't want to become a distraction for you." "A distraction?" Thomas echoed incredulously. "You're not a distraction, Samuel. You're my gardener, yes, but you're also a person I admire. I want to help you, but you have to let me in." Samuel looked down at the marigolds, their bright colors now a distant echo against the darkness settling in his heart. He felt a pull to share his burdens, but hesitated. "It's complicated, Thomas. I have a daughter who needs medical care, and I'm not sure how I'm going to afford it, but I can't let you worry about that." "Why not?" Thomas challenged, his voice firm yet compassionate. "You're working tirelessly for me, and I want to support you in return. There's no shame in asking for help." Samuel's thoughts raced. He had spent his life protecting his family from the harsh realities of the world, and yet here was Thomas, offering a lifeline. "I don't want charity, sir. I want to earn what I have." Thomas's expression softened, understanding the pride that drove Samuel's reluctance. "You're not asking for charity. You're asking for support. There's a difference." Samuel took a deep breath, grappling with conflicting emotions. I don't want to be a burden." "Sometimes letting people help you is a way of allowing them to share in your journey," Thomas replied. "You don't have to walk this path alone." The sincerity in Thomas's voice stirred something deep within Samuel. He felt a flicker of hope, but he quickly extinguished it. What if he accepted help only to be rejected later? "I'll think about it," he said finally, unable to meet Thomas's gaze. "Just remember," Thomas said, "you're not alone, and I'm here if you need anything." As Thomas turned to leave, Samuel resumed his work, but his hands moved mechanically, his mind swirling with thoughts of Lily's health and his mounting worries. He watched Thomas retreat, a man consumed by the burdens of success, yet slowly beginning to grasp the deeper connections that could define his life. Despite his struggles, Samuel felt a change within him, a small, flickering flame of resilience. As he worked, he found himself questioning not only his own worth but also the values that had guided Thomas. Perhaps there was a way to bridge the gap between their worlds, a way to help them both discover what true wealth meant. As Samuel toiled in the garden, he could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him, yet there was a slight shift in the air, an unspoken understanding that perhaps, just perhaps, they could learn from each other and redefine their lives in the process. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the sprawling estate, Thomas Reynolds stood on the terrace, his gaze fixed on the vibrant garden that Samuel Parker had so diligently cultivated. The flowers bloomed in a riot of colors, dancing gently in the evening breeze, and for the first time Thomas felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a flicker of admiration for the man who had breathed life into the once neglected grounds. Yet, as the beauty enveloped him, a nagging thought crept into his mind, pulling him away from the serene landscape. He had recently learned about Samuel's daughter, Lily, who had fallen gravely ill, and the gravity of her condition weighed heavily on his heart. "Samuel," he called, his voice echoing softly against the stone walls. "Could you come here for a moment?" Samuel, who was on his knees tending to a bed of roses, looked up, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. His face, weathered but kind, betrayed a hint of worry. "Yes, Mr. Reynolds, is everything all right?" Thomas motioned for him to approach, his mind racing with thoughts about the little girl who had captured his attention the moment he learned of her plight. "I heard about Lily's condition," he began, his tone more serious than usual. "I can only imagine how difficult this must be for you." Samuel straightened up, the weight of his worries momentarily lifting as he met Thomas's gaze. "Thank you, sir. It's been tough, but we're managing. Her mother is worried sick, but we're doing our best." "Managing?" Thomas echoed, a frown creasing his forehead. "Samuel, you shouldn't have to manage. You should be able to focus on her recovery without the burden of financial strain." Samuel shook his head gently, a humble smile gracing his lips. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Reynolds, but it's my responsibility to take care of my family. I've always believed that we must find our own way, no matter how hard the path." The businessman's heart ached at the thought of the sacrifices Samuel had made for his family. He couldn't fathom the pain of watching a child suffer, let alone having to make impossible choices in the wake of it. "What does she need?" he asked, his voice firm with determination. "Tell me what it costs, I'll help you pay for her surgery." A silence fell between them, thick with unspoken emotions. Samuel's expression shifted from surprise to disbelief, and then to a gentle resolve. "Mr. Reynolds, that's incredibly generous of you, but I can't accept charity. I have to find a way to provide for her myself." "Why not?" Thomas replied, a hint of frustration creeping into his tone. "You're in this situation through no fault of your own. I have the means to help you, and I want to. It's not charity, it's simply a neighbor helping another in need." Samuel's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and he took a deep breath, steadying himself. "With all due respect, sir, I believe that true strength lies in facing our struggles head-on. Accepting help, especially when it comes so freely, would undermine that strength. I must find a way to make this right on my own." Thomas felt a fire igniting within him, a mixture of frustration and admiration for Samuel's unwavering principles. He had lived a life where wealth offered solutions to problems, where money was often seen as the answer to every question. But here was Samuel, standing firm in his values, determined to carve out a path for his family even at great personal cost. "But what if you can't?" Thomas pressed, his voice softer now. "What if you're left with no options?" "Then I'll find another way," Samuel replied, his tone resolute yet kind. "I've always believed that love and sacrifice make us stronger. I can't let my pride get in the way of what needs to be done for my daughter." The conversation hung in the air, a palpable tension swirling around them. Thomas's heart raced as he grappled with the magnitude of Samuel's words. He had always viewed sacrifice as a necessary evil, something to be endured rather than embraced. Yet here stood Samuel, embodying the very essence of sacrifice and love. "Samuel," Thomas began, searching for the right words, "I admire your spirit, truly, but I want to understand. What drives you to refuse help when it's offered?" Samuel paused, his brow furrowing in thought. "I believe that every challenge we face is an opportunity to grow. It's easy to rely on others, but in doing so, we may lose sight of our own strength. I want Lily to grow up knowing that we face our problems head-on, that we don't shy away from hardship, but embrace it." Thomas felt a lump form in his throat, the weight of Samuel's wisdom pressing upon him. He realized that he had spent years building walls around himself, concealing his vulnerabilities with arrogance and wealth. And now, here was a man who had lost so much, yet continued to fight with grace and dignity. "Perhaps," Thomas said slowly, "there's more to this than just pride. Perhaps it's about teaching your daughter the values that matter most in life." "Exactly," Samuel replied, his eyes lighting up with conviction. "I want her to know that love, sacrifice, and resilience are what define us, not the money in our pockets." "Then what can I do?" Thomas asked, his heart racing with the urge to bridge the chasm between them. "How can I help without crossing that line?" Samuel considered the question, his brow furrowing in thought. "You can support us in ways that don't undermine our struggle. Maybe help with the logistics, finding a way to get her the care she needs without handing over money directly." Thomas nodded slowly, a sense of understanding dawning on him. "I can do that. I have connections, resources. We can work together on this, without compromising your integrity." As their eyes met, a silent agreement passed between them. In that moment, Thomas felt a shift within himself, an awakening to the beauty of true partnership grounded in respect and understanding. Samuel's humility was a reminder that sometimes the greatest wealth lay not in what one possessed, but in the richness of one's character and the bonds formed through shared challenges. "Thank you, Samuel," Thomas said, his voice steady. "Let's figure this out together. I'll do everything I can to ensure Lily gets the care she needs." Samuel smiled, the weight of his burdens feeling just a little lighter. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. I appreciate your willingness to help, and I believe we can find a way that honors both our values." As they began to discuss logistics, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the garden. The flowers swayed gently in the evening breeze, a symbol of hope and resilience. In that moment, Thomas felt a profound sense of purpose igniting within him, a realization that the true essence of wealth was not measured by material possessions, but by the connections forged through love, sacrifice, and the courage to stand by one another in times of need. Thomas Reynolds stood in his lavish office, staring out at the sprawling estate below. The late afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the meticulously manicured lawns and the vibrant flower beds Samuel Parker had tended to. Yet there was a heaviness in the air, a weight of realization that pressed down on him. He turned away from the window, his thoughts swirling like autumn leaves caught in a gust of wind. What had he learned from Samuel? He recalled the gardener's quiet strength, the way he spoke of his family with such reverence. It was a stark contrast to the relentless pursuit of wealth that defined Thomas's own existence. "Samuel," he called out, his voice echoing slightly in the vastness of the room. "Can you come up here for a moment?" Moments later, Samuel appeared at the door, wiping his hands on a faded towel. He looked up at Thomas with a mix of respect and wariness. "Yes, sir. Is everything all right?" "Please, have a seat." Thomas gestured toward a chair across his desk. It was an unusual invitation for a man of his stature, but Thomas felt a compulsion to understand Samuel better. "I wanted to talk to you about, well, your past." Samuel's brow furrowed slightly, but he nodded and sat down, folding his hands in his lap. "I'm not sure what you'd like to know, sir. I'm just a gardener." "No, you're more than that," Thomas replied, leaning forward. "You've shared bits and pieces of your life with me, but I sense there's a depth to your story that I haven't grasped yet. What sacrifices have you made for your family?" Samuel hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor as memories flooded back. "There was a time when I had an opportunity to work for a prestigious landscape design company," he began, his voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "It was a dream job, something I had worked hard for. But my mother fell ill, and I had to choose. I chose to care for her and my daughter." Thomas listened intently, the weight of Samuel's words settling in his chest. He could see the flicker of pain in Samuel's eyes, a reminder of what it meant to put family above ambition. "That must have been difficult," Thomas murmured, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of such a decision. "You sacrificed your future for them." Samuel nodded, his expression resolute. "Family is everything, sir. I couldn't abandon them. I know what it means to struggle, but I wouldn't trade my love for my daughter and mother for any job." Thomas felt a rush of admiration mixed with guilt. Here was a man who embodied values he had long dismissed as weaknesses. "But didn't you ever think about how your life could have been different?" "Every day," Samuel admitted, a faint smile breaking through the somberness. "But I find joy in the little things, my daughter's laughter, the flowers blooming in the garden. That's wealth to me." As Samuel spoke, Thomas felt his perspective shifting. He had spent so long chasing after accolades and success, only to realize that he had neglected the very essence of life that Samuel held dear. "You've shown me a different way of looking at things," Thomas said quietly. "I've been so consumed by material wealth that I've forgotten what it means to truly live." Before Samuel could respond, Thomas's phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the moment. He glanced at the screen and felt a pang of anxiety. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, answering the call. "Yes, this is Thomas." As Thomas spoke, Samuel watched him with a thoughtful expression. He couldn't help but wonder what burdens weighed on Thomas's mind, what pressures drove him to maintain his facade of success. The conversation ended, and Thomas hung up, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Everything all right?" Samuel asked cautiously. "It's just business," Thomas replied, shaking his head. "I'm always caught up in it. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it." He paused, contemplating his next words. "You mentioned your mother lost everything due to a scandal. What happened?" Samuel stiffened slightly, the question striking a nerve. "My father was a well-respected landscape architect. He built beautiful gardens all over the city. But when the financial crisis hit, he lost everything overnight." His voice trembled slightly. "The scandal wasn't even his fault, but the shame of it destroyed him. He passed away not long after." Thomas felt a wave of empathy wash over him. The man before him, with calloused hands and a humble demeanor, had once come from a legacy of beauty and artistry. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "That's a heavy burden to carry." "It's part of life," Samuel replied, his tone steady. "We all face our battles. I just try to honor my father's memory through my work. Every flower I plant is a tribute to him." Thomas's mind raced as he absorbed Samuel's story. Suddenly an idea began to take shape, a glimmer of hope that could intertwine their worlds. "Samuel," he started, feeling a surge of determination. What if we started a community garden project together?" Samuel's eyes widened in surprise. "A community garden?" "Yes," Thomas exclaimed, his enthusiasm growing. "We could create a space where people can come together, learn about gardening, and find solace in nature. You could share your knowledge and passion for plants while helping others." "I don't know, sir," Samuel replied, his voice cautious. "It sounds like a lot of work." "Exactly," Thomas insisted. "But think about the impact we could have on the community. We could help families learn how to grow their own food, instill a sense of pride in their surroundings. It could be a place of healing and connection." Samuel considered Thomas's words. It was a radical idea, one that could change lives, including his own. "You really think it would make a difference?" "I know it would," Thomas said earnestly, "and it would redefine what wealth means for both of us. It's not about money or status. It's about the richness of human connection and shared dreams." A silence settled between them, filled with possibilities. Samuel's heart swelled with hope at the thought of such a project. "I would love to be a part of that," he finally replied, a smile breaking through his earlier reservations. "But we would need help. We can't do it alone." "Then we'll gather support," Thomas said, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "We'll reach out to the community, local businesses, anyone who can lend a hand. Together we can create something beautiful." As they discussed the details of their plan, a sense of camaraderie began to blossom between them. In that moment, both men realized that their lives were forever changed, not just by the project itself, but by the understanding they had forged through their shared experiences. The garden they would build would not only be a place for plants to grow, but for their friendship to flourish, redefining the very essence of wealth in a world driven by materialism. In the days that followed, Thomas and Samuel worked tirelessly, inviting neighbors and local organizations to join their vision. The community garden took root, blossoming into a vibrant hub of activity. Families gathered, children laughed, and the scent of fresh earth and blooming flowers filled the air. As they planted seeds together, their laughter echoed through the garden, a testament to the bonds of friendship and the richness of shared dreams. In the heart of that garden, both men found a new definition of success, one that transcended wealth and status, rooted in love, compassion, and the beauty of human connection.